Hello and welcome, and my name's Adele. I'm from Virtuous Promotions and I'm here to encourage you with the Word of God. Now this session is about assumptions, how we can make assumptions when we're in ministry or even before ministry about what God is doing in our lives. Now the Word is littered with ways in which God speaks to us to say that He works out our steps. Now in Proverbs 16:9 it says, "A man deviseth his own way, but the Lord directs his steps." Now that just says to us that as much as we have plans, and plans are good, you need to plan your life. You need to have a plan, a focus for the next 5-10 years or so. But it is God that directs your steps. He's the one that will work it out for you. So we have to be ones that put our plans to God, ensuring that He is in every step that we do, that we don't make a step without His say so, without His sanctioning. One, because as people, as human beings, we're skilled, we have abilities, we have talents, we have giftings, but that shouldn't be the only prerequisite to step out and do something. We must hear the Word of God and be prompted by His Spirit to move on something, even if we haven't got all the details there. But if we know that God's in it, then He'll always provide for us. And so we just want to use a particular example from the Bible to really, explain this a little bit more. And I want to use Saul. Now, Saul was our king in the Old Testament, and he was the first king appointed in the Old Testament. And it was by the Israelites really, badgering God and saying, look, we want a king. And Samuel, who was appointed a prophet at the time, said, look, this is not a good idea. God is your king. You don't need any more kings. He is your king. And yet this wasn't enough for the Israelites. They still wanted someone to represent them. And that because they saw with their own eyes that other nations had kings. So they said, well, we want one as well. And that's based on an assumption that they didn't have a king. God clearly said, I am your king. Throughout the whole of the history of the Israelites being birthed as a nation, and prior to their birth as a nation, He always declared that He's their provider, He is the I am. And yet that wasn't enough. And doesn't that say a lot for ourselves? That God has given us 66 books of promises, and He clearly says in His word what He will do with us and what He will do for us. But yet still we will look other ways to satisfy this urge to have something physical in front of us. We will worship an image. We'll even worship ourselves. We'll have something else instead of Him. And it says a lot about our human nature that we constantly have to go to God and ask Him to, enlighten us and to, crucify our flesh, so that we, as people, we will always hearken to His voice, and we will always obey His voice as well. So let's have a look at 1 Samuel 13, which talks about Saul and his first sin. Now, in 1 Samuel 13, I'm going to pick it up from verse 8. And it says that he tarried 7 days according to the set time that Samuel had appointed. But Samuel came not to Gilgal, and the people were scattered from him. And Saul said, bring hither a burnt offering to me, and peace offerings. And he offered the burnt offering. Now, if you go back to verse 8, and it talks about how Samuel had appointed him to wait. And it's back in verse chapter 10, in that particular place there, where Samuel says to Saul, wait, I will tell you when I come to Gilgal what to do. We will sacrifice burnt offerings, and then I will tell you exactly what to do. But what did Saul do? He didn't do that. He said, as it says in verse 9, bring hither a burnt offering to us, that I may sacrifice. And he did. He sacrificed burnt offerings. And this was not in the instructions. In verse 10, and it came to pass that as soon as he had made an end of offering the burnt offering, behold, Samuel came. So Samuel was going to turn up. And the one thing about Samuel, as it says in the Bible, every word that he ever spoke, that God allowed him to speak, never fell to the ground. That just means that his word was true. You could trust that man's word because he was speaking on behalf of God. So why on earth Saul would not believe the man of God at the time is simply down to his heart. So let's continue. And Samuel said, yes. And what hast thou done? And Saul said, because I saw that the people were scattered from me, that's one thing, and that thou camest not within the days appointed, that's the second thing, and that the Philistines gathered themselves together at Michmash. He already made a decision based upon these three external things. That he saw that Israelites had scattered from him, Samuel hadn't turned up, and the Philistines were starting to encroach on him. These three things made him make the wrong decision. He now assumed because these things were happening that Samuel wasn't going to turn up, that things weren't going to change. That now, as he thought, in verse 12 it says, therefore said I, the Philistines will come down now upon me to Gilgal, and I have not made supplication. He's already assuming what the Philistines will do and what will happen. And so he says, and I have not made supplication unto the Lord. I forced myself, therefore, and offered a burnt offering. He forced himself, he felt compelled then to now make an offering unto the Lord without having specific instructions to change what Samuel had said. He had done his own thing. And as we continue, Samuel said this to him, thou hast done foolishly, thou hast not kept the commandment of the Lord thy God, which he commanded thee, for now would the Lord have established thy kingdom upon Israel forever. So he even forfeited the opportunity for the kingdoms to be established through his lineage, but it didn't happen. And again, it shows in verse 14 what Samuel had instructed by God to tell him. And this is what he said, but now thy kingdom shall not continue. The Lord hath sought him a man after his own heart, and the Lord hath commanded him to be captain over his people, because thou hast not kept that which the Lord commanded thee. So important that he kept the commandments. He obeyed God, but instead he kept his own ways. He kept his own decisions and did that above God's. He assumed because of his external factors that God wasn't going to turn up, that things were not going to work out. As much as Samuel said to him already in chapter 10, wait for me, I will come and we will sort things out, I will let you know what to do. He didn't. He thought, I'm going to run ahead because things aren't going the way it should be, and I'm going to just take things into my own hands. So let's have a look at another example of Saul in 1 Samuel 15, and in verse 1 it says this, Samuel also said unto Saul, the Lord sent me to anoint thee to be king over his people, over Israel. Now therefore hearken thou unto the voice of the words of the Lord. Now Samuel's telling him quite clearly, I've appointed you because God told me to, but listen to God. But listen to God. Hearken yourself unto the words of the Lord. And then he proceeds to tell him what God says. He said, thus saith the Lord of hosts, I remember that which Amalek did to Israel. Now, how he laid wait for him in the way which he came up from Egypt. Now, God is reminding Saul of what happened to Moses. The first battle that Israelites had to deal with was the Amalekites, and that was in Exodus 17. And there it shows how the Amalekites attacked Israel from behind, and they attacked the weakest link, basically. Those who were feeble, weak, you can imagine the older ones, the children, the women, they attacked those. And God says, I remember what he did. I remember what the Amalekites did. So this is what I want you to do, Saul, in verse 3. Now go and smite Amalek and utterly destroy all that they have, and spare them not, but slay both man and woman, infant and suckling, ox and sheep, camel and ass. And this was the instructions from God. These were the instructions. So let's see what Saul did. He decided to do differently. We'll pick it up in verse 7. And Saul smote the Amalekites from Havilah until thou comest to Shur, that is over against Egypt. And he took Agag the king, the Amalekites alive, and utterly destroyed all the people with the edge of the sword. Now in verse 9, but Saul and the people spared Agag and the best of the sheep and the oxen and of the fatlings and of the lambs and all that was good, and would not utterly destroy them, but everything that was vile and refuse, that they destroyed utterly. Now again, clearly it was not the instructions of the Lord. He told him clearly what to do, and Saul assumed differently. He said, you know, I really believe that maybe God really would let us spare the fatlings, but what would possess Saul to actually keep the king? What would possess in a man's heart to keep the king? When you know, when God has told him that look what they did to our people, look what they did to the children of Israel, to your own people, Saul. They took the children, they took the elderly, they took the vulnerable, they took the feeble, and they attacked them. This same king authorized it, or his lineage and the kings before him authorized this. And I want you to annihilate them. But yet King Saul, as if he would ignore that, he would ignore the plight of what Israel had gone through, and had said, I want to take something for myself. I want to keep this for myself because I think it's worth keeping. And the worst thing that he could do was take the thing that was refused by God, rejected by God, and then offer it unto God as a sacrifice. The worst thing that we could ever do, people of God, is offer something to God that has already been rejected by God. If that is the case, we cannot do that. We can't do that. God will not accept that offering. He will not do it. No matter how pretty it looks, no matter how great it looks, no matter how attractive it is to us, if he says to destroy it, you cannot put that on the altar. It is not something that God will accept. And this is what Saul did. He thought that because he took the choice oxen, the choice cattle, it would be accepted. That to take the king, maybe to show off to this king that I have annihilated your kingdom and here you are humiliated. But that was not the instructions that Saul was given. He was told to completely annihilate it. Now this is definitely where we see Saul's heart, because his heart was not for the people. And God said, that's why God said in verse chapter 13 there, where he says, I've already got a man who's after my own heart, who has my heart. That is, he has the heart of the people. He will put the people first. He will not lord over them and just, go into places and show his power and authority and not consider the people. Because for him to have done this, for Saul to have taken the cattle, to have taken the king, says that he really didn't care what God had said. He was trying to show the people that we have control over these people, the Amalekites. We have ultimate control and we can do what we want. Look at the authority and power that God's given us. But that's not what his power and authority should be used for. It should be used to obey God. So we can't be ones that assume anything with God because he's so unpredictable. But the one thing is for sure, his word will tell us what to do. And we should never waver or steer away from what he's telling us to do. We should always obey his voice. So be encouraged. Don't assume anything with God. Always seek him. Always ask his instructions. He will tell you. He will speak to you because he's your Father. He is your King and he's your provider. Be encouraged, and we'll speak again next time.